Some months ago, the Greek people voted for you because you told them you would put an end to austerity and bailout programs. But in the end, you weren't able to fulfill these promises. Why should they trust you again?
7 months ago, we promised the people of Greece that we would put up a strong fight and that we would struggle and bleed so that they would stop bleeding, and that we would fight for their rights whilst asking for change within Europe. We know that we belong to the European family, and changes can't be made in just one country. Europe has to change its direction. We kept this promise, and the Greek people know that.
And now?
Now we have an agreement which you described as a strict bailout, but we knew from the beginning that every compromise would end up as an agreement. Our aim was to obtain an agreement, not a Greek exit or the dismantling of the eurozone. Now, for the first time, the restructuring of the debt stays open for Greece. There is no question that debt relief has to be carried out, and this will be done after the first review. Greece cannot hope to be attractive to the markets with its debt having risen from 120 to 180% within 4 years of implementing a dead-end austerity policy.
Wasn't it discussed in 2012? It wasn't mentioned by the Eurogroup that the debt would be up for discussion?
This is exactly the case. It was mentioned, but there was no practical commitment, and it was said that when Greece reached primary surpluses, there would be decisions made. There weren't. And it wasn't just that the previous government, Mr. Tsipras, didn't bring the issue to the table. He was stating everywhere that debt was unsustainable. Now we have very powerful allies. Even the IMF speaks clearly on debt.
If you managed to form a government, what would you consider a success regarding debt? Are investor haircuts still on your agenda?
Καταρχάς, θεωρώ πολύ μεγάλη επιτυχία της κυβέρνησής μας το σκέλος το χρηματοδοτικό της συμφωνίας που φέραμε.
First of all, I think that the financing part of the agreement is a big success for our government. May I remind you that when you followed, and your station covered, all the phrases of the negotiations, the countries of the north, including Germany, didn't even want to consider new money for Greece. And now it's not only new money, but all the needs of the country are fully covered up to 2019. And this is a de facto mini-debt restructuring itself, because the bonds of the ECB and the IMF we had to repay had an interest rate of 4.5% and 3.8%. Now, under the ESM, it's 1.5%. So it's a mini-restructuring through the cost of borrowing. Our banks will also be guaranteed through the recapitalization process by the end of 2015. So this will happen before the bail-in programs start after 2016, which means that all the deposits of the Greek people are secured.
Πράγμα που σημαίνει ότι διασφαλίζονται οι καταθέσεις των Ελλήνων πολιτών.
Now you have in your hands a program which includes reforms. Greece and previous governments are being criticized because they didn't implement them. What are reforms for you? Are you speaking the same language as your European partners? Do you consider, for example, privatization or the opening of closed professions as reforms? These are some of the things that the creditors are asking for from the Greek government.
Look, I think that the problem at the heart of the European leadership today is that it's dominated by a harsh and dogmatic neoliberal policy. Of course, Greece needs reform. But if we were to talk about the opening of closed professions, I wouldn't start with the hairdressers. I would start with the media owners. If we spoke about the need for reform, I wouldn't mean selling off public property. I would mean reform of the state so that it would be effective and serve the citizens. For example, if we had the time and we hadn't inherited the Hellenic Republic Asset Fund, which is a bad fund, we could have saved public assets. For example, the 14 regional airports. Are you going to proceed with this privatization? You're asking me for privatization?
On the controversial airports issue?
I don't want to avoid any of your questions. You understand that the condition for the airports was a demand. I won't say why. You can all understand, I guess. There were special interests. However, we are an honest people and we honor our agreements. If we commit to an agreement, we will implement it. And we ask the same from the other side. Because the agreement may have negative points, such as the one I mentioned before. It also includes that collective bargaining will be back and our partners must abide by this. Collective redundancies will stop and our partners will have to abide by this. The energy sector will stay under public control and our partners must abide by this. We have to avoid the primary residence auctions for the people who can't afford to pay back their loans, and our partners must abide by this. We will demand that our partners honour what we have agreed to, and we, on the other hand, will be obliged to do the same for issues we disagree with, because that is what a fair agreement means.
Very recently, the President of the EU Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, mentioned you personally in a speech before the EU Parliament and specifically described something which happened during the period of negotiations. He said that he proposed that you impose taxes on the Greek ship owners and that you argued against this.
I'm laughing because my friend Jean-Claude was in a very difficult situation. The IMF and he himself turned down our proposal to increase the taxation on the profits of big companies. In fact, when we submitted this proposal, I know that behind the scenes some Greek entrepreneurs were calling the Commission and the IMF to put pressure on them because they wanted to avoid paying more taxes. Back then, the IMF, Mrs. Lagarde, I remember, told us that this policy was a counter-growth measure and wouldn't help. While everybody knows that cutting wages and pensions helps, getting taxes from the profits of big companies is a counter-growth measure. And I think that Jean-Claude wanted to avoid being criticised about this. So, as an experienced politician, he brought an issue to the table that he knew in advance would be too difficult to solve. On the contrary, we explained to him that according to the Constitution, and you can't change the Constitution from one day to the next, it's extremely difficult to impose taxes on the ship owners as they're not based in Greece. They have offshore companies and you can't find them. So, if we want to be effective in taxing the wealth escaping from this country, we have to change the whole European institutional context concerning offshore companies. And if you like, let's not talk about Greece. Let's talk about Mr. Juncker's country, Luxembourg.
Speaking about Juncker, you said that he is a friend of yours.
Yes, because I think that he has honest and warm feelings for the Greek people.
Personally with you? Because he has used strong words about you during the negotiations.
I think we had an honest relationship. I also criticized him. We have a different mindset. He is a right-wing politician and I am a left-wing politician. However, we have an honest relationship.
Going back to that period of hard negotiations, the face of those for a long time until the referendum was Yanis Varoufakis as finance minister, and he didn't vote for the agreement you brought home afterwards. Was he a wrong choice?
Every Prime Minister has the possibility to choose the minister who brings the best results. In football, if a coach sees that a player isn't playing to his full potential, he replaces him, as I did. At the beginning of the negotiations, Varoufakis was very powerful. After being targeted by most of the European partners, they stopped talking to him and he couldn't communicate with them. So I had to replace him.
So you sacrificed him?
There is no sacrificing, but only offering. And this was what we had agreed. Nothing is permanent. When I saw that Varoufakis couldn't bring an agreement and couldn't communicate with the people he had to sit with at the table, I told him, Yanis, you can't bring an agreement. And he agreed, saying, yes, you're right. It's not me who can bring the agreement. I think we separated as friends.
Let's go back to that dramatic night when you spent 17 hours in this room with the other European leaders trying to get that long-expected agreement. The international press wrote that your partners submitted you to waterboarding, and others said that they crucified you. Do you accept those words? Is that how you felt during that night?
If there is a crucifixion, it's good because there will be a resurrection afterwards. But now it's time to speak about how the Greek people, this country that has suffered for the past 5 years, needs to be resurrected. Look, it was a very difficult meeting. I made it clear to them that I wasn't going to leave if they didn't withdraw that terrible proposal, which included a fund outside the country, in Luxembourg, which would aim to immediately sell off public property for 50 billion euros, which is 25% of our GDP, at a very low price. Because during a crisis, prices are extremely low. I told them that if they wanted me to put up the Acropolis for sale, they should say so. I would not leave the table and I wouldn't sign. They pushed me more and more, but the next morning they realized they had to fall back. And they did. Some of them had very bad feelings against me because the referendum highlighted the democratic deficit in Europe. They kept asking me, how should I tell my voters that I haven't got a referendum? And I told them that that was their problem, because democracy is the supreme value in Europe.
Πρόβλημά σας τους είπα που δεν κάνατε δημοψήφισμα, διότι η δημοκρατία είναι υπέρτατη αξία μέσα στην Ευρώπη.
And what if, at the time you held a referendum in Greece, the other governments did the same in their countries, asking the people whether or not more money should be lent to Greece? What do you think the result would be? And what do you say to the European people about the money they've given to Greece? Why did they have to give it?
If we believe that democracy is the foundation on which Europe has to be built, I would say, why not? Let referendums take place, but not with only one country, and in the interests of Europe. The referendum should ask the people whether they think austerity is the only solution, if alternative policies are needed. Greece found itself in the eye of the storm. It's not the Greek people who are to be blamed. The big victory after these 7 months of hard negotiations is that we changed the way the Greek people are seen by the European public. The opinion before was that Greeks are lazy and wanted to live beyond their means. This has changed, and the opinion now is that Greek people were unjustly tortured and were paying the price for bad political choices and mistakes made by the previous Greek governments. We need to break from the past.
Do you regret holding the referendum?
No, not at all. If the people hadn't participated in those negotiations, we would have had to accept very hard measures without financing, which would have led to a new deadlock within 3 or 5 months. Therefore, the referendum was the reason we're alive now, still standing and able to fight. We're a torch for the rest of the European people. If Syriza wins, and it will definitely win, and if it wins with a big majority, the message to Europe won't be that the Syriza government failed, but that it is still standing and wants a different path for Europe, and this message will be very strong.
Greece has found itself at the center of another crisis, the refugee crisis. It concerns all of Europe, and Angela Merkel has said that it is even worse than the Greek crisis. Mr. Tsipras, your government has been criticized for not doing what it should do. That is, to ask the EU to activate its mechanism. Do you accept this criticism?
I think this is an argument used by the Greek opposition, whose stance on the refugee crisis is unacceptable. I will not mention what we did when in government, as we received absolutely nothing from the previous government. They accuse us of opening the borders and inviting the refugees into Greece, as if they live in a jar, as if they don't know that so far 800,000 refugees have entered Europe, and as if they don't understand that this is a global crisis which coincided with the political change in Greece. But we didn't invite the refugees to come into Greece, nor did Angela Merkel invite them to go to Germany. which will take 800,000 refugees by the end of the year. So here we see a great and very deep hypocrisy by the conservative and populist part of the country's political life, in which I include New Democracy. And unfortunately, I include parties that belong to the socialist group in the European Parliament. And I say unfortunately because this is not the belief of the Social Democrats in Europe, particularly the Potimi party, which has the most populist position for vote-hunting reasons, which is the same as the Golden Dawn position on this issue.
With regard to the elections, so far, according to the polls, Syriza will win but won't have an absolute majority. Who will you join forces with, especially if the independent Greeks are not in the next parliament?
In the January 2015 elections, a large majority of Greeks wanted to vote for us but didn't dare because they were frightened off by the arguments of our opponents that we had a hidden agenda and that we wanted to take the country out of the Eurozone. So we were 2 MPs short of an absolute majority. Today, nobody in the country can accuse us of having a hidden agenda. We proved that in the critical instance, we handled the cost and the responsibility of keeping the country in Europe and avoiding a much greater economic catastrophe. Today, this is no longer an issue, and the 2 more MPs that we are asking for is an absolute achievable goal. Syriza will definitely be the first political power, and I believe that an absolute majority is a totally achievable goal. If it is achieved, we will seek collaborations. If it's not achieved, we have our programme and our plan. There are political powers or persons in the Parliament who will not risk another election. Therefore, I am almost certain that just a few days after the 20th of September, there will be a government carrying on the great effort we launched on January 25th.
Η οποία θα συνεχίσει την μεγάλη αυτή προσπάθεια που ξεκινήσαμε στις 25 του Γενάρη.
Ποιος είναι ο στόχος σας για τα επόμενα όταν θα λήξει αν εκλεγείτε τελικά?
What is your goal for the next 4 years if you form a government? What will you do? Where would you like to take the country and what is your vision for the next 10 years? How do you see Greece then?
10 χρόνια. Πώς φαντάζεστε δηλαδή την Ελλάδα σε 10 χρόνια από τώρα?
Πιστεύω ότι σε 4 χρόνια από σήμερα η χώρα θα είναι διαφορετική.
In 4 years the country will be different. I believe that this transitory recession will be over in the first semester of 2016. We will have passed the consequences of the capital controls. We will be back to growth on the condition that we get a positive outcome in the debt negotiations. I think it is an achievable goal, if not by the end of 2016. Then, at the beginning of 2017, for the country to be back in the markets, and therefore without the need for loans, supervision, and without the difficult situation we have been facing. And of course, it's up to us to break away from the past and to shrink and destroy the sources of corruption that have been keeping us down.
What keeps you awake at night when you are back home alone with your thoughts? What is your biggest concern?
Now you want me to really open up. Because we went through periods of great anguish. There had been many times where I would worry whether the next morning the country, banks and economy would be able to survive. And I made difficult decisions, at cost, but always with a clear conscience. And in this sense I am satisfied, because the trouble I have sleeping at night has nothing to do with my conscience, but with the difficulty of paying salaries, stabilizing the banks, and reinstating economic and social stability. And I believe that the Greeks can see this. The Greek people came through these difficulties with great calmness and dignity, and they can see in the eyes of the politicians those who are lying to them and those who are telling them the truth.
Κύριε Πρόεδρε, σας ευχαριστούμε θερμά που είστε μαζί μας και καλή σας επιτυχία.
Σας ευχαριστώ και εγώ. Να είστε καλά.